Binding of Isaac has a pretty strange love-hate relationship when it comes to balancing, whether that be with bosses, items, or even entire characters. While this problem has become far less prevalent as time has gone on, especially during Repentance's development, there are still a multitude of different elements to the game that have been left in states of disrepair and neglect for upwards of several years. Of these many cases, there is one that stands out as being widely agreed upon by the community, yet equally misunderstood and undocumented. The infamous fan favourite, Apollyon. To the vast majority of the player base, Apollyon is nothing more than a bland character with little to no substance backing him up. But while many people understand that he is a bad character, very few people understand why this is the case, and an even fewer amount have ever tried to explain how this actually happened. And that's exactly what I intend on doing today. In today's video, we'll be taking a deep dive into Apollyon's history, uncovering the truth behind his peculiar design choices, how he ended up the way he is, and finally, discussing the possible ways to help give our stone-faced companion the redemption he rightfully deserves. Our story begins on January 3rd, 2017 with the release of Isaac's second major DLC, Afterbirth Plus. Afterbirth Plus included a plethora of new content, including items, floors, bosses, and a brand new playable character, Apollyon. Apollyon is a fairly unassuming character, starting with basic stats, below average health, and his personal active item, Void. Void is a 6-charge active item that upon use absorbs all item pedestals in the current room, granting Apollyon unique perks depending on whether the item absorbed is a passive or active item. If Void absorbs a passive item, 2 of his stats will be randomly selected and given permanent buffs, with each stat receiving an appropriate increase. These buffs can also stack with each other should multiple passives be absorbed at the same time. If Void absorbs an active item, it will not grant Apollyon any direct buff. Instead, it will be permanently stored inside of Void, and its effects will be activated the next time Void is used. Void can store an infinite amount of active items inside of itself, allowing Apollyon to both hold and use multiple different items at the same time, so long as he's still holding Void. Void's dual-wield capabilities result in Apollyon becoming a surprisingly destructive force to be reckoned with. Bad or useless passives can be ground down into raw stats, and actives can be stashed away to mass-produce different resources, or to simply magnify your own abilities far beyond any other character's wildest dreams.
See, now that's some bullshit.
So, what did people think of Apollyon? Well, unfortunately, even in his infancy, things weren't looking too good. The most common criticism Apollyon faced was that he was just kinda boring. Although Apollyon was capable of snowballing to dangerous levels in the right hands, his mechanics felt rather bland and lacking in intrigue, especially when compared to previous DLC characters who often had ideas and mechanics that far surpassed Apollyon in both nuance and complexity. However, there is one very important fact about Apollyon that is vital to understanding why this is the case: his unlock method. Unlike the vast majority of characters, Apollyon did not have any unlock requirements, and so was available to play from the very beginning, alongside Isaac. In essence, this made Apollyon a tutorial character. Now, while this doesn't fully exempt Apollyon from criticism, it does help us to recontextualize why he was designed so simply. Being one of 2 tutorial characters, Apollyon needs to be accessible to newer players, as they will likely not be able to pick up on the more intricate mechanics until they have more experience with the game. To Despite the various criticisms the community had with him, Apollyon was in an incredibly comfortable position, filling the role of an alternative tutorial character that was not only accessible to new players, but also allowed for more in-depth strategies in the hands of experienced players. And Apollyon remained in this position for quite some time, all the way until April 30th, 2018. Every few months after its release, Afterbirth Plus received small content updates known as booster packs. These often contained a handful of new enemies, items, and occasionally a boss. A total of 5 were released, with the final booster pack, Booster Pack 5, being released on April 30th, 2018.
Wood.
Booster Pack 5 made 2 additions to the game that, while mostly indirect, ended up causing Apollyon to fall onto a slope of rather extreme decline, assuming he hadn't already started. The first was a tweak to his unlock method. Instead of being available from the start, Apollyon was now unlocked after defeating Mega Satan, making him a much more significant milestone in a player's journey. The second addition was the inclusion of the 4th DLC character, the Forgotten. To keep things brief, the Forgotten was a massive success, being one of the most mechanically unique and diverse characters the game had seen thus far, blowing not just Apollyon out the water in quality, but arguably the entire cast, a statement which even years later holds fairly secure. Now you might be wondering, aside from a slight tweak, none of these had any major direct impact on Apollyon, so how did Booster Pack 5 end up spiralling his reputation to such an extent? You see, characters in Isaac often try to scale their mechanical diversity based on when you are expected to unlock them. This is why the DLC characters in particular present more creative and intricate gimmicks, as the average player will often take a longer period of time to unlock them, and therefore will be more equipped to properly handle them. Apollyon was made with this same rule in mind. He is unlocked by default, so the mechanics he introduces are far simpler in comparison. Upon being changed into a Mega Satan unlock, however, Apollyon was put on the same progression level as the Forgotten, one of the most mechanically diverse characters in the game, despite possessing none of the traits required to uphold this new position. Without any of the necessary changes to accommodate his new role, Apollyon began to experience a steep decline in his overall reputation, slowly fading into obscurity as he bore the weight of responsibilities that far surpassed his design's limitations. It was painfully clear to everyone that Apollyon was in desperate need of some kind of help, with some suggesting that a dedicated Apollyon rework was long overdue, and would be capable of both fixing him and bringing him back from the gutter, a sentiment which was widely agreed upon by many players.
Let's do this.
What the fuck? Hey, Chuckle Nuts! Next time, eat a salad.
And on November 18th, 2024, nearly 6 years later, that is almost what happened. A mere 5 days ago, at the time of rewriting and re-recording this script, the Repentance Plus DLC released to the public, and with it came a multitude of balancing changes, with one of these changes being an admittedly small buff to Apollyon. Void was now only a 4-charge active item, as opposed to the previous 6 charges. Now, while this wasn't the rework that many had hoped for, nor did it fix the previous simpler character with a complex unlock method problem, it did ultimately result in Apollyon becoming a stronger character than before. grinding items into stats more frequently, and getting a staggering amount of extra mileage out of absorbed active items. While it is unfortunate that Apollyon didn't get the treatment that he objectively deserves, especially since other problematic characters ended up getting much larger buffs or reworks years prior, I think I speak for the majority when I say that while it wasn't an extravagant bang, at least Apollyon was able to go out on a positive note. While Repentance Plus has put Apollyon in a visibly better position than he has been in recent years, one of the glaring problems that continues to persist is the fact that Apollyon is shockingly underqualified as a Mega Satan unlock. And so before we end this video, I want to take a moment to analyse the heavily requested hypothetical solution to this problem, the Apollyon rework. But more specifically, is this rework even possible? No. And I'm going to try and explain why. There have been many characters throughout Isaac's life that have often been considered bad or otherwise rather lacking, with most, if not all of them, eventually receiving buffs or a rework to help secure them back on their feet. Even prior to their respective changes, each of these characters had a variety of different unlock conditions scattered across different stages of the game's progression. From the perspective of a new player, these characters can be quite daunting to unlock, and may take several tries in order to do so. In turn, these characters can have gimmicks that are much more challenging and less restricted, as when the player does eventually unlock them, they will have more experience with the game and therefore be better equipped to handle and understand them. Now, let's cycle back to Apollyon. As previously established, Apollyon's gimmick was designed to be accessible to players with very little, if any at all, experience with the game. This, however, has the unfortunate side effect of making Apollyon a very restrictive character, as it is virtually impossible to make any substantial changes due to how simple his design is, without turning him into a completely new character altogether. Of course, this wouldn't be an issue if Apollyon was still a starting character, but alas, that is no longer the case. The sad part about this is Apollyon is the only character in the game who suffers from this problem. Every other character who has had a rework or major buff has retained the same unlock method since their initial debut, which means those same restrictions were not in place, and they were able to be expanded upon much more freely when it was their time, providing they didn't deviate too far from the character's intended progression level. As grim as it is, there is no real way to rework Apollyon in a manner that retains his core ideas while also adding multiple extra layers of complexity to account for his current level progression. However, there is still a very simple way to fix Apollyon that not only requires a minimal amount of gameplay changes, if any at all, but also puts him back in the stable position he was in so many years ago. And that is to alter his unlock method. As you may have picked up throughout this video, almost all of the problems Apollyon faces in the modern day stem directly from Booster Pack 5 and the sudden swap into a Mega Satan unlock. The proposed solution here is to just revert this change, and make Apollyon an early game character again instead of a mid-game character. Now, this isn't to say Apollyon should be a default option again like in Afterbirth Plus, but due to how similar in nature he is to other early game characters like Magdalene, Cain, Eve, and Azazel, it would be entirely possible to give him a new unlock method, place him back amongst this group, and have him fit right in without any real concerns. It's definitely an anticlimactic route to take compared to giving Apollyon a brand new coat of shiny gold paint, but I do think this is the only realistic action that will ever truly fix Apollyon. He may be presented as a Mega Satan unlock, but he was, and still is, a tutorial character at heart, and no amount of buffs will ever be able to change that. Apollyon is by far one of the strangest characters in Isaac's history. A character whose downfall was caused not through poor or unbalanced gameplay decisions, but instead via a complete misunderstanding of his core identity. A decision that has, and likely will, continue to haunt him for the rest of his days. And yet, despite all of this, Apollyon remains an overall pretty solid character who can quite comfortably stand on their own 2 feet. Assuming, of course, they're not being mismanaged to hell and back. In all honesty, the chances of Apollyon getting what he needs is fairly unlikely. But who knows? It's not the first time he's had his unlock method changed, and it's pretty clear that now, more than ever, he's in the eyes of the developers. Perhaps this is their way of trying to put him back on the right path, or maybe this is just a one-off buff. Either way, it is nice to see Apollyon finally get some kind of victory after several years of neglect. Which, let's be honest, is better than some Afterbirth Plus newcomers can say. And with that, that's pretty much it. I don't have anything clever or witty to say, so, you know, like and subscribe, the usual, and I'm just gonna roll the credits. See ya.